So massive welcome to Ryan Jenkins. Ryan, I've been looking forward to having you on the TRM podcast for a while. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you're an author. I think three books.
That's right.
And I have a massive admiration for anybody who writes one book, let alone three. And we're gonna be talking about your latest book, Connected, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But you're also a speaker. I think you've done 70 plus keynote talks around the world.
Yeah, just this year alone. So yeah, it's been a busy year on the heels of the book.
You deserved a break, and also you're a thought leader, particularly in team connections, and also you've done a lot of work around the whole generational, the consequence of the different generations, the next generation. So fascinated to get your insights into all sorts of things. And as I said, we will talk quite a lot about this book, Connected, which I absolutely love. And the first thing that blew me away was when you look on the back. When you look on the back cover and you see, I wonder who's had something to say about this. The first two people you've got is Daniel Pink and Patrick Lencioni, which is pretty impressive to get those guys raving about your book.
I know, it's such a pleasure, and I've read all their books and huge fan. So yeah, to get that type of acknowledgement was amazing, and I'm looking forward to continue to follow their work as well.
Fantastic. So let's really interesting, because when I heard about you and picked up the book, and I thought it always fascinates me the angles people take when they said there's something here that we need to explore a little bit more. So do you want to just explain where this concept of connectability came from, that led to you writing it?
Yeah, I studied generational differences for over 10 years at this point, and I was always helping organizations and leaders understand the evolving differences across generations, so we can recruit, lead, connect, communicate across generations. And I was writing my second book, which was all about Gen Z or Gen Z, about that generation who's going to be the fastest growing in the workforce over the next decade. So I was writing a book to inform our clients and audiences on who is this generation, what can we expect from them. And it was in researching that book, I found that they're experiencing the most loneliness and isolation that we've ever seen before. And now, as of this recording, Gen Z is twice as likely to experience loneliness than our elderly population. So we've never had this type of shift before. And I found that to be very alarming. And I wanted to figure out, why is this happening, and how can we help this generation, again, as they pour into the workforce? And how can we create companies and leaders that are create this connectable culture in order to help Gen Z? And so that was the genesis of it. And that was all pre-COVID, if you can believe it. So began researching over 12,000 global workforce, workers around the world. And we came up with this original research. And turns out that while the research was kicked off by Gen Z, no matter your generation, we're experiencing more disconnection than ever before. In fact, 72% of the global workforce says that they feel disconnected at least monthly, with 55% saying at least weekly. So this is something we're all experiencing to a higher degree now for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we'll talk about. But it's still most acute amongst Gen Z. And so that was the genesis of this book. And now we've created assessments, and we have tools that can scale connection inside organizations. And it's really important because, hopefully I have time to convince you and the audience that connection is humanity's most significant need. So it's been a joy to step into this work. And we've been able to help organizations from Netflix to Pepsi to, Northwestern Mutual, you name it. Every industry, it needs more connection, and we're eager to help.
No, fascinating. So in our industry, we work with hundreds of recruitment business leaders and their teams, typically SMEs. But again, some people who will be listening to this podcast will be running much larger organizations. Everybody's still wrestling with the post-COVID, when everybody's working from home, and then we start coming back and we're developing hybrid models. And this year in the world of recruitment has been quite a tough year for quite a lot of people, in the sense that the market's been a bit tighter, job flow's not been quite as good. So the instinct has been, let's try and get people into the office so we're together as much as possible. But that hasn't come from, you can get more if we're connected, or the kind of research that you have established. So I'm really interested to understand, when you talk about particularly Gen Z who are feeling this, and then these stats you shared in your book about 70% of people feeling lonely at some time. What are the implications on that on themselves, on their teams, on the businesses?
Yeah, I want to step back and tell a quick story that I think will help frame the answer to your question as far as, what's at stake here and what are the implications. And one of the stories we covered in the book is this brilliant story about this community in Kugluktuk, which is a small community in very northern Canada, which it can be 50 degrees below and it can be dark for 20 hours a day. And unfortunately, this was a part of the world that had the highest teen suicide rate of any community on planet Earth. And so this small community of about 1,500 folks wanted to reverse this tragic trend. So they did something really unusual and unexpected, and they actually introduced the national sport of Canada, which most people initially think is hockey. In this case, it's actually lacrosse. They introduced the national sport of Canada, in this case, which was lacrosse. And the whole community just fell in love with this sport. And the Kugluktuk Grizzlies, which is the high school team, began to practice on these icy Arctic fields, and they fell in love with this sport. And eventually they made it to the national championships in Toronto, which is remarkable in and of itself. But the most remarkable thing is that for, again, a community that had the highest teen suicide rate of any community on planet Earth, once they introduced the game of lacrosse and a sense of belonging and a sense of connection took root in the community, that highest teen suicide rate fell to 0 year after year after year after year. And so, that's really underscores the value of connection. And just like the people in Kugluktuk, listeners of this podcast episode, your teams are facing the same invisible threat, and it's actually making people 7 times more likely to be disengaged at work. We're 5 times more likely to miss work. We're 3 times more likely to underperform. And perhaps the mic drop data point of all this research is that when we feel a sense of connection at the place where we spend most of our waking hours, which is at work, we're 313% less likely to quit. So this is why it's so important, and it doesn't take a lot of heavy lifting and complete culture change to focus on connection. It just takes small pro-social behaviors that we can all do on a daily basis to actually move the needle in a very significant way. So that's back to your question around what are the implications. Disengagement, missing work, performance, retention, all these things are on the table if we're not thinking about connection.
So obviously we can get people back into the office and hanging out together a little bit more, but obviously, and from your book, as you described, there's a lot of little touches that make so much sense when you articulate it the way you have done in the book. Do you want to just help anybody who's running a business or running a team just understand what some of those tips and tactics might be?
Yeah, and I think that I'll take a step back and make sure everyone kind of has a clear understanding of the definition of loneliness, because it's not what you would expect. So loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. And so, you and I have experienced this, listeners have experienced this. You can be in a crowded office space with surrounded by people, but if you don't have connections with those individuals, you can still feel isolated, alone, and disconnected. So it's not necessarily about the presence of people. Getting together is important, but we can still cultivate connections digitally. We have to work extra hard to do it, but we can still do that. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And too often, many of our clients just think, yeah, let's just get everyone together and let's do a happy hour or get together. And that's part of a solution, but we have to really focus on those connections because, again, it's not the absence of people, absence of connection. And so I think a good way to maybe approach your question is what can we do is looking at the 3 things that get in the way of our connection with others. We identify 8 in the book, but I'll tell you the top 3. According to the research, the 3rd thing that folks said was getting in the way was what we call dependency shift. So you and I are less dependent on each other than ever before. Thanks to technology, right? So if something breaks in your home, you're less likely to go knock on a neighbor's door and cultivate or have an opportunity to connect or call a sibling or parent. We're less dependent on each other. And so we have to find ways to spark that dependability, because if you think back to our ancestors, that was a critical part of keeping the tribe together, right? Is that we were dependent on each other. We all had unique roles and we were relying on each other. And so one of the things we interviewed Dr. Stephen Cole, who's out of UCLA, and he studies loneliness at the molecular level, which is fascinating. But he gave us a tip that to use 4 words to spark more dependability. And to get maybe a little bit sciencey and nerdy here, he was telling us about that there's 2 circuitories in the human brain, and one of which is the threat circuitory. So when you and I are in a burning building, the threat circuitory turns on in our brain and we flee that building, which is great. That's a healthy brain working. The same thing happens when you and I experience loneliness. We feel disconnected from a team. We're vulnerable. So our brain goes into a fight or flight state, and that threat circuitory turns on, and we want to flee that situation. And so the only way to override our threat circuitory is through meaningful dependability. So again, you would run from that burning building, but if you had a child in that building, you would override your threat circuitory and run into that building to save that loved one because that person was dependent on you. And so the same is true in our teams, right? If someone's disconnecting, the 4 secret words we can use is, I need your help. I need your help. That's it. And so that will actually override the threat circuitory in that disconnected person's brain and pull them back into the group. Because the tricky thing about loneliness is we turn inward when we start experiencing it, and we begin to distrust the people around us. And so it takes the tribe to proactively pull the team together. So we're only as connected as our most disconnected team member. So try those words. I need your help. Another kind of swing on that is, hey, can I get your advice on something? Simply asking that of someone, immediately they have to demonstrate empathy, right? Because they have to put themselves in your shoes, and it creates that connection between 2 individuals. And according to the research, it takes as little as 40 seconds to cultivate a connection between 2 people. So we're not talking, hours and hours and a ton of investment in a relationship, just 40 seconds. So if you're sharing an elevator with someone, that's an opportunity where both of you can boost your well-being by creating a small connection.
So simply by asking somebody, which in effect makes them feel valued or needed, that creates a connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, simple as that. So that's one tip. Another tip that I think was really helpful, we decided to go to the professions, or the professionals that experience the most isolation that we could think of, which was astronauts. And so we profiled Christina Koch, has spent over 328 consecutive days in the International Space Station, which is the most of any female astronaut. And she saw a total of 11 people during those 328 days. So highly isolating, lots of opportunity to experience extreme loneliness. And we asked her, how do you overcome that? How do you overcome that sense of loneliness? And her answer surprised us. She said, clear direction. Clear direction. So knowing what to do every day and having clear directions on the mission, the goals, your objectives, your tasks, that can actually cultivate a sense of connection where we can focus on what we need to do. And so that can be really important. So oftentimes if we're feeling disconnected, sometimes making a list of the things we need to do, or keeping your mission or objective in front of you, can help us stay connected. Because again, if we think about loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of connection. Well, one of the connections we have to often nurture is a connection with oneself. And so there's a lot of connection points that we need to be thinking about if our goal is to create connected teams and reduce loneliness.
It's just on that one, Ryan. It's funny, because I've done a lot of strategic work with businesses over the years, and obviously start with the end in mind. Where are we trying to get to? And I'll always talk about, you've got to get this clarity of vision, to set expectation, to create direction, to create focus, to create etc. But I never use the word connection, and it's I will be using the word connection from now on, because you're absolutely right. This is really what pulls us together.
Yeah.
Love that. What's number 3?
So dependency shift was one we talked about. The number 2 thing that people told us was getting in the way of their connection was technology and social media.
Yeah.
No surprise there. But I think how we need to think about technology and ultimately our communication is really the crux of the conversation here. And I fell into this pitfall, and I'm sure many of the listeners can relate, that we think that we're more connected than ever before because of all this wonderful technology that you and I are engaged with on a daily basis. But that is not the case, because there's a big difference between communication and connection. Those 2 things are not the same thing. So communication is the exchanging of information, and that's processed in the front part of our brain. So think if you were texting "I love you" to a significant other, you can text them that all day using the wonderful technology at our disposal. but that is just communication. It doesn't become connection until they hear the tone of your voice, they see your body language, they feel your embrace. That's when it becomes connection. So communication is the exchanging of information. Connection is the feeling seen, heard, and valued in a person-to-person interaction, and that's processed in the back part of our brain. So a good way to think about it is communication is dealt, but connection is felt. And so again, if our goal is to create stronger families, stronger communities, stronger teams, we have to make that jump consistently, and we have to quit lying to ourselves that we're connecting over technology, because that's just not what's happening. We're communicating, but we need to be more thoughtful about moving from communication to connection. So where can you trade communication for connection, right? Can you trade a text message for a phone call? Can you trade a virtual meeting for an in-person meeting? Can you trade a statement for a question? All of these are subtle opportunities you and I can make on a daily basis to move from communication to connection.
But also, I've just decided my 5 love heart emojis that I send with my I love you messages is now I'm not doing any. But I know you started out in the world of sales, but we talk a lot about taking in the world of recruitment, talking about relationships, the power of it, and obviously relationships are underpinned by connection, and everything you were saying, shifting from the text to the phone call, to the in-person. It's really interesting. Okay, so I know you work with all sorts of sizes of organizations. When it comes to loneliness, because I was thinking about, and you've answered one question already, when it comes down to the generations, the next generation really being affected by it. But business leaders, and we've built a community with hundreds of recruitment business leaders, so we feel a little bit less lonely than we might do, because we can connect in lots of different ways, face to face, etc. But the loneliness of the business leader, is that something you've kind of explored in all your travels and the work and you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the it's lonely at the top is a common statement we all use, and it's true. But according to the research, we're all experiencing this disconnection, and so it's not only just for leaders, but I think what's challenging for leaders is oftentimes they think they can't get too close or can't connect because of the tough decisions they may have to make down the road, or they don't want to be perceived as favoritism. And so those are valid concerns, but don't use those as excuses not to connect with each other. And I'll give you another good example and tip here, because the number one thing that according to our research that gets in the way of our connections is busyness. And I would argue that leaders today are more busy than ever before, right? There's so much clamoring for our time and attention. And so that can very, very strongly disrupt our connection with others. And so we have to find ways to put brakes on busyness and to carve it into our calendar. And one way, one of the leaders that we profiled in the book did this is he created what he called Connect 5. So 5 minutes at the top of each team meeting. So once a week, when he got his whole team together, he'd spend 5 minutes where one person would share one non-work related picture. So they did this virtually. They've also done this in person. So it's versatile in that regard. And just one person would share one non-work related picture for just 5 minutes. That's it. And they would put it at the top of the meeting, because they knew if they put it at the back, the busyness would just bulldoze that conversation. So they put it up front. And the example they shared with us is one person shared a picture of her marathon training. No one on the team had any idea that she was this extraordinary athlete. In fact, she qualified for the Olympics at one point, and no one had any idea. And so now they began to see the human behind the job, and they could take one step closer to connecting with her. And so that's a good example of the leaders getting closer to that individual, but also creating space and opportunity for other members to create those connections, all the while putting a pause on busyness, because that's the number one thing that derails our connection.
How does all the research you've done, what's the connection? I'm trying to avoid that word, but I can't think of another. How does that, on Maslow's belonging in Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So, again, it's something we're all familiar with, we've all studied, and we know that if you can create a sense of belonging and people feel they belong to the team, the organization, that's pretty cool. And will have implications. But is this a nuance of belonging, or is this something different?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Yeah, we sort of the idea is we create connections with each others, and that leads to the sense of belonging. And to your point, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he puts belonging right in the middle. And we respectfully challenged that placement of belonging in our book. And we created a model where it looks like a Wi-Fi icon, where belonging, the sense of connection, is at the top. It's the largest bar. So it's not our most urgent need, because we need food, water, shelter most urgently every day. But our most significant need as humans is connection with one another. And I
Yeah.
can say that with confidence because the longest study of adult development ever conducted by Harvard University has spent over 80 years. It's still going on today, which is remarkable. And they've studied over 2,000 people, and they've been trying to find the definitive answer to a long and healthy life. And they found that it's not diet or exercise or wealth. It is quality connections with others is the definitive answer to a long and healthy life. So it is our most significant need, and we need it because we're social beings. It's just we're allowing so many other things to get in the way.
Mm.
So I think I forgot the belonging. Yeah. So yeah, belonging is just that important, and it's a byproduct when we cultivate connection, because we all want to feel seen, heard, and we want to feel as part of a unit. And just think back to our ancestors who roamed the plains, right? There was a great sense of belonging, and if you got excluded from that group, your survival rate plummeted, and
Mm.
that's why our body still experiences a stress state when we experience loneliness or isolation or disconnection. Our
Mm.
body goes into this hyper stress state. And then also think about the bad apples of our communities. What do? We put them in jail. The bad apples of those that are in jail, what do? Put them in isolation. We hate this. It kills us. And so I think we're all in for a rude awakening as far as how do we cultivate more connection, and the science around how it impacts us is really pretty new. And so again, it's so important. We got to find ways to cultivate more belonging and connection at work.
Mm. I was when I was reflecting on your book, there's the loneliness angle, and I sort of got a little bit frustrated with it because I got excited about the proactive approach, and you've got so many cool models in this book, whether it's the self-assessments or the less loneliness framework. There's so many cool models in it, but as a leader, if we set out strategically to create the most connected business, the most connected group of individuals, that's pretty powerful, both from an engagement and from a performance point of view. But actually, the more I looked at your research, you identified this genuine challenge in society around loneliness, but again, I found myself getting really excited about driving the connected agenda within organizations. Is that something that you've done, that you've seen, where people say, right, we're going to take our connectability or our connectedness, or whatever the expression is, to a whole new level?
Yeah, and it's so important. And I think, when we have conversations like we're having, Gordon, that people get it, but it's still intangible, right? Like, wouldn't it be wonderful if you and I could measure the connection level we were having right now? We can't quite measure it. So we've been doing our darndest to try to help organizations measure that. So we created the world's first empirically validated assessment that actually measures the connection levels that exist across the team. So it measures the connection levels between a leader and their direct report, the team members, around amongst themselves, and then also the connection with the individual and the organization itself. And so that's a way to kind of we like to use the metaphor of a brick wall, right? Like, all individuals, we're these bricks, and if we're positioned all well and we're all playing our role and we're executing on what we're supposed to be doing, and we create a what looks like a formidable wall, but without that mortar, right? Without the things that are connecting us, we'll crumble at the first sign of adversity.
Mm.
And so we have to create this connection. And so that's been our effort. And then we recently developed a tool called Rivet. So it's like a mechanism that connects two things to make them stronger, that organizations take, and they actually get matched with someone that they're scientifically proven to develop a strong connection with. Because often we're looking for permission, right? It would just be weird if I just sent you a cold email and said, "Hey, we should go get a cup of coffee." It can still be a little clunky, and so oftentimes we're just looking for permission. And so we've been using Rivet as a way to not only connect folks, but give them permission to actually cultivate that connection. And so I say all this to back to your question, for organizations that are serious about cultivating this sense of connection.
Mm.
We've been building these tools that can actually help them implement it and actually measure it and scale it as well.
Do you buy into on the Gallup 12, where they have "I've got a best friend at work" statement, one of their 12? Do you buy into that? That always, I always understood the I like and get on with the people I work with, and that's certainly been important to me over the years. But this kind of concept that Gallup within the Gallup 12, that if you've got a best friend at work, that'll maximize you. It almost felt too strong a statement, as opposed to where I quite like yours, which is saying, you know, you can have meaningful relationships and feel connected, as opposed to having a best friend.
Right. Oh, yeah. Your hesitation with that question, Gordon, a lot of organizations feel, and I hear it all the time. So, do I buy into it? 1000%, yes. But a lot of people, there is that hesitancy because they think the same thing you. And I still think we're kind of caught in this, you know, my personal life is my personal life, and those are where my friends are and work. I just need to get along with folks. And so many organizations have gone to Gallup and asked them to remove that because there is so much tension with that question. And Gallup will not do it because there's such a strong correlation between just having one other friend at work improves your engagement so much. And so
Yeah.
they can't get rid of it because it's such a strong correlation. But I think that's encouraging for folks because we're not talking about being friends with your entire team or the entire organization.
Mhm.
You just need to find one other person that you feel like you can is a confidant and that you can bounce things off of and perhaps get personal at times. And that's it. So we're not talking about all these other people, just find one other person, and
Yeah.
that's where we can get all those boosted
Yeah.
benefits of connection.
I have, by the way, got a whole range of people I absolutely adore that I've worked with. So I get the principle and enjoyed it, but it was quite interesting. Okay, so what's so actually, and again, I really would urge anybody listening to this to get the book onto your shelf and have a read with it, because there really are so many practical approaches that as a business leader we can do to increase that connections internally, which is going to lead to engagement, performance, etc., etc. How do people kind of work with you, or what else can you offer to business leaders or individuals that on the back of all the research that you've done?
Yeah. I mean, we're constantly producing new tools and content out there. So, folks can find me at ryanjenkins.com. That's kind of the mothership where you can find a lot of our work and check out the book and all the tools as well. On Rivet. So recently we worked with Netflix, who we're helping their leaders cultivate this culture of connection, and they're now using Rivet for all of their new folks that come inside the organization, because those first 90 days, and I know the recruiters in your audience, they understand those first 90 days are critical. And so they found that if they can get those folks connected to someone else in the organization, that they have a strong or strongly compatible, they're going to stay there longer. And so, again, these are the efforts we're trying to take to leverage this. But so many of the busy leaders that we talk to that have read the book or are immersed in our work, they find it refreshing that it doesn't require a lot of extra effort. We just have to be a little bit more intentional. And again, we're all social creatures. And if you, as a human, are on the other side of someone's pro-social behavior, which is, compassion, generosity, just giving their undivided attention, these pro-social behaviors, if we're on the other side of those, we're 278% more likely to turn around and go give that to somebody else, because it feels so good and we want to turn around and give that to somebody else. So again, as leaders or individuals, if we do these small things, the ripple effect can be massive. And I think it's going to help our organizations, but it's going to have a ripple effect into our communities as well.
I love the concept of Rivet. So effectively, in the employee, we talk a lot about the personalization of the employee experience. So actually, you join our organization, we'll connect you with somebody that scientifically we know you're going to get on with. And wouldn't that make for a better first for your onboarding? Absolutely, I love it. I think it's great idea.
Yeah, right on. Thank you.
Great idea. Good, Ryan. And do you ever make it over to the UK?
I do, yeah. Most of my work is in the States, but I love getting over there. And I was 2 weeks ago, I was in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, doing some work. So, yeah, I love getting over there, and we'll have to connect once I next time in the neighborhood.
Yeah, you let me know when you're over. But I really appreciate you coming. And as I say, I think that book is absolutely brilliant. Not only because I think it's a really fresh angle and it really stimulated my thinking, but I just think it as a practical, some really seriously practical tools for leaders and individuals. And I thought it was a great. So I can see why Mr. Pink and Mr. Lencioni were raving about it. Thank you. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful break over the Christmas period.
Thank you, Gordon. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Don't forget to follow the TRM podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts for a new exciting episode every week.